Let's go Roberto in Italy, how a universe produce a conscious mind without God. I think that's an interesting topic.
Yeah, it is interesting.
Especially considering everything we know about the universe and causal relations seems to be dependent upon minds in that sense. I don't know how you would have that prior. But anyway, Roberto, what's your position on that? And thank you for calling. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Roberto.
Yeah, I don't have a position. I'm just calling to ask you guys. Maybe you know more than me.
Oh,
we don't know that. Do you have any expertise in this area? And you might be quite knowledgeable. You might know a lot more than us.
Well, I can actually tell you right now, because we have produced consciousness in the universe without a God. It seems to be we've not needed to add that assumption in any way in terms of our mechanisms of how we look at things in neuroscience or even psychology. None of that's really needed, right? It's kind of a closed causal sequence from the standpoint of like, sure, we don't have every component, but at any point, I don't think we're adding God to it. And then when you talk about God, right, you talk about something that potentially some theists argue prior to t equals 0. And by that, I mean kind of the up for grabs state of, the singularity to the universe. I don't see necessarily how you argue for something. This is a similar argument towards causality as a metaphysical thesis rather than a physical one. It's like, I don't know how you argue for that outside or beyond t equals 0, because it seems that for what we know constitutes a mind is a very long process, more so towards the back end of where we're at now than it does seem to be a fundamental part of nature. But yeah, you could get into routes of idealism and things like that, I'm sure. But yeah, I would say that that's kind of just begging the question without the kind of substrate that's needed in order for you to get there, which would be matter from my perspective.
You said substrate. Jordan, am I on the line with Jordan Peterson? What's going on here?
The axiomatic. I won't do it.
Yeah, no. I'm with Mike on this one. We know we have consciousness and we don't think we have a God. I think you've got all the problems of explaining consciousness with a God, because where did this God come from? Now you have to explain not only just a limited being that's around for a little while and can do certain things. Now you have to explain the existence of an omnipotent, infinite being, or at least highly non-finite being. I don't think you sort of jumped out of the frying pan into the fire, Roberto. But what are your thoughts on this? How do you produce a conscious mind without God, the universe? What are your thoughts on it?
I don't know. I'm confused a little bit. I might say that, do you guys think that the consciousness, like, for example, my consciousness had a beginning somewhere, or your consciousness, did it have a beginning? Your personal consciousness.
So I don't really like the verbiage of when someone talks about, it's like similar to like the first premise of the Kalam, when you talk about something beginning to exist. This is just language we use that has methodological utility. It doesn't actually have epistemic justification from right? Like we can use these kind of concepts of cause and effect, but that doesn't satisfy like the causal skeptic or someone that doesn't, or maybe like a David Hume or people that might take a Humean approach to causality, where you're in this situation of it's, to me, it seems you're taking a perspective at which I at least I would say for causal relation, right? Like that's going to exist within kind of the arena, so to speak. Like, I guess it goes back to the whole beforehand thing. I'm not understanding how you would apply that as a fundamental feature, like consciousness in general, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm referencing what point you're at.
Yeah, like for example, you did not exist as a Mike before, let's say you were born or something, yeah? Can you go back? Can your consciousness go back to the eternity? Like, can you remember yourself as existing back to the eternity, for the eternity, no?
Yeah, I'm failing to understand what me remembering what that point would be relevant to. Because clearly none of us are going to remember that.
At some point, yeah, but that means that at some point you had a beginning. Your persona had a beginning at some point, which means that it did not exist before that point. It cannot go back to the eternity. It hadn't.
Well, so that's the issue I'm having, is that, like, so if you say it had a beginning, I'm okay with using that, like I said, from a methodological, like, utility standpoint, of that we can talk like this and you can understand what I mean, that my parents had, you know, sex and then I existed. And at some point during that, I had consciousness. And you could, but at what point you go, right here, I had consciousness. What was the antecedent cause that gave me that? When do I, that seems to me like that's the whole venture of what we're trying to discover. I don't know how much kind of philosophical armchair thought can provide any basis when we're going to need to inductively assess these things through science, it seems.
Roberto, it sounds like you are starting to think about this issue. I don't think that there's a lot of meat on the bones, sorry, vegans, of this topic. So I'm not particularly interested in your call, Roberto, but I do appreciate you calling. Mike, you got this. I'm fine with moving on.
I would just ask. Roberto, I would just add a question. Like, what is the hang up for you? You're saying, like, you know, how could it be the case that there's consciousness without a God? Like, I mean, why do you, it seems to me like you're kicking the can down the road to start with consciousness in order to account for it, which seems to be like a what you call inferring the
no, like, actually,
so what's your position? Like, why is that a struggle for you?
Well, the whole thing is, like, confusing because, like, for example, let's say me as a Roberto, I had a beginning. And the funny thing is, like, before that beginning, I did not exist. My persona did not exist. And then it just somehow it came into existence.
Well, so that depends on how you define it, though. This goes. So sorry to cut you off, but right, like you say, Roberto existed at some point. It's like, well, the matter and the energy we have that are changing form have existed prior, but it's going to be dependent on what state you say this is Roberto. And then if you look into, like, cell regeneration, like after 10 years, is that the same Roberto? It's just like the ship of Theseus kind of problem, where that's why I'm stating it just has some methodological utility. We can use it to communicate and know what I mean by this carpenter made a table begin to exist. He used non-table material, like lacquer and nails, and he created a table. But the thing is that at what point do you really say that this thing was actually that? So the whole beginning thing trips me up on the whole call, because it's the same reasons why I kind of reject the first premise, is that I just don't think it has any epistemic value. I think it just has value in the way we manipulate language.
But do you agree? Do you agree that no, I'm not talking about language. I'm talking about the persona, the consciousness. We the three of us agree that we exist, and you are Mike, he's Johnny, I'm Roberto. We agree about this, yeah? I'm not talking about the language, I'm talking about consciousness. So at some point,
language is baked into a lot of that, though. But yes, they're like, yeah, then you get into that philosophical perspective of, am I the same person 10 years later when I've had every cell regenerate in my body? Well, I mean, we're probably going to say this is a whole philosophical problem of identity and what it constitutes to sustain identity over time.
Are you saying that the atoms, before I was created, are you saying that the atoms, my atoms, they identify as Roberto?
No,
he's not saying that.
No, because that's the language part that you pack on to a collection of trillions upon trillions of different molecular interactions, right? So, like, that's where the language part gets baked into it, because we have to subjectively assess the physical phenomena that is going on, right? And you can just categorize those things into that. There's a position called mereological nihilism, which is a position that, like, essentially is kind of like there are no composite objects. There's no wholes, right? Everything is, you could kind of look at everything's changing form, and so nothing's really a thing, right? So this is a whole what you're raising is a I don't think a thing that's made a lot of progress in philosophy in itself. But I don't know what limit that reaches to God in any way or consciousness, because to me, when we look at these things from a part basis, I can see why consciousness is an emergent property based on what we know. But if you start, like I said with the last caller, if you start with God as your ontology at the beginning, like, then you're just working from the bottom or the top down as opposed to the bottom up. But I don't know if that makes any sense. We don't have very much time left on callers. So I'm sorry to kind of get the broomstick out.
Thanks, guys, for taking my call. No, it was perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully that gives you some. I would look. Yeah, definitely. It sounds like you're interested in identity and problems of identity over time and persistence of identity. That's a really fun thing in philosophy to look at. I don't think you'll make as much progress as anyone else has, because it's
just do some reading. Do some reading on it. Look at contemporary scientific understanding of consciousness to fuel the fire, and then refer it back to some philosophical readings on this. But yeah, keep reading, and then call back if you have maybe a more focused question. Your question doesn't seem particularly focused, and that's not a bad thing. You're starting it. But
no, I actually really, I like Roberto's call. I think it's just, my thing is, this is not a failed venture in philosophy, but it's, when I say you probably won't make progress, it's nothing towards you individually. It's just to say that I don't think that there's been a lot of meat on the bones in terms of progress on this discourse in philosophy. But anyway,
thanks, guys. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.